Okay, let's get started with the second part here. Before we move on to the different topic, let me ask you guys, do you have any question on HTML, XML, anything that's not clear, specifically for XML? And we can talk about it. So any question on anything that we discussed today?
Harshal, like about XML or HTML, like if I want to explore on W3 School, like it will be endless. So like up to what extent like I can go through, or is there any specific area where I need to go look for the HTML or XML?
What I would suggest is on W3 schools, you get familiar with the input controls, different tags for like a HTML link, right? So www. How do you create the links in HTML? How do you set up the image tag? How do you set up the like a drop down box, checkbox, and those things? So those are very important because that's what you will use when it comes to the automation testing. And also get familiar with the properties of those controls. So kind of like an input text box that you have. Let me see if I can just share it here. So you have input, then every control will have some type of a name property. Okay, so name is equal, you can name it something at, let's see, first name, if it's a first name control. Okay, then it will have ID property. ID could be same as a name, but you can create like a first name one or something like that. But so every control will have certain properties. Definitely, it will have a name and ID property, which is most important for you guys when you are doing the automation testing. Okay, and I will talk about that, why it's important, and so forth in the automation class. Then it will have value property. So whatever you type in, right? And then there is a type called, there is another property called type. Okay, so this could be type equals text box or checkbox or whatever it is. So these four properties are very important, but there are other properties like a width, size, how big the text field is supposed to be, what is the max length, and so forth. So those are some of the things you want to watch out for, those controls. So go through the W3 schools basically site and just try to understand what these properties are and how they work with the HTML controls. Because that's what we will utilize in the automation class. Because that's what we will base our automation class on. Because the tool, they will need to know what is the control on the page and how do I get access to that particular control so that I can read the value or write the value in those controls when we talk about the automation. Okay, so for now, just go through that site, input, checkbox, drop-down box, and so forth. And I think the next Saturday would be the automation class, so we'll go through a little bit more on that. Okay. For XML, I mean, sky is the limit. You can create your own tags. So as long as you get familiar with the format, that's all it matters with the XML. Does it have does it help you?
Yeah, it's
Okay. Now you guys do understand the difference between the usage of HTML and the XML. I think Dilip talked about it a little bit. When to use HTML and when to use XML. So if I go back here in this slide. Right, so Dilip talked about this particular slide here. What is XML and what is HTML, right? And when to use it. The main difference I want to point out here on this site is HTML is presentation oriented and XML is more like a data oriented. So as you guys saw, right, it's all about data when you talk about the XML. So it's not talking about, it's talking about what is the book number one, what are the values, or what are the data elements that goes along with the book, that particular book. So it's more like a content or data oriented. While HTML is presentation oriented. So HTML is something you can use to display in the browser, create the web pages and all those things. With the XML, you cannot do that. XML is strictly, you want to send the data to different systems. You can create the XML documents. For example, all the book, whatever the XML that you created, or Dilip showed you in the example, and send it to another system. And so another system can read those XML data and then do whatever they need to do. So it's mainly used for data exchange, nothing else. XML, that's the XML. Okay. So that's the main difference here. And that's the important difference. And you guys will see how we need to leverage XML to test out the services and so forth. So let's talk about today's topic here. Basically, API testing and SOAP UI is a tool. There are a bunch of other tools out there, like a Postman is another tool you can use for API testing and so forth. But let's see what really API is first. Then we'll talk about the web services. What are the formatting that you need to use for web services testing? What are different protocols? And how do you actually go about testing the services as well? Okay. And that's where the tool here, we will leverage the SOAP UI tool, which you can use to test the web services. Did everybody download the SOAP UI tool that I sent you guys in the email? Yes. Okay, so hopefully you guys have it on your computer. Okay, great. And we'll go through installation as well a little bit later. But let me just give you like a 10 minutes overview, what we are trying to do, and then we'll start working on the tool. What we are trying to do is a web services concept, okay? So web services concept is part of the API, but let's understand what the API is first. So by definition, API is nothing but application programming interfaces, okay? Which is nothing but a piece of software component and which exposes certain functionality of the software in terms basically over the internet. When it does that, it is called web services. So what I mean by that is, let's take a look at here. Let's say we have two different sites here. One is Amazon, okay, and the second one is let's say JP Morgan Chase Bank. Okay. So here we know there is Amazon site here, Amazon.com. Now, when you are going through the payment processing, right? When you are putting, you bought some items from Amazon, now you're ready to make a payment. Okay. So at that point, Amazon, when you enter the credit card, at that point, what Amazon does is it communicates to the Chase Bank software over the internet. So there is some internet over the internet, and it will call the software component that is sitting here for credit card processing. Okay, credit card processing. Some software they have exposed over internet. So it will go through that. It will pass in all the data, your credit card number, what is expiry date, whatever you put. It will get sent to the credit card component that Chase is having. And this credit card component will run through the logic and make sure your credit card is valid. Okay. And then it will communicate back and send the information, yep, credit card is valid. You can move on to the next step of shipping or whatever they need to do. Okay. So whatever the JP Morgan has exposed, this is typically the application programming interface. API. This is called a software component, which exposes certain type of functionality. Now, when the software component is exposed over the internet, specifically, you can call it via using the URL, some type of URL, call it www.jpmorganchase.com/credit card, something like that. Then it is called a web service. So it is kind of like technically a JP Morgan is providing a service over the internet by exposing this particular piece of software logic, okay, which does nothing but validation of the credit cards. That's all it does. Okay, so this whole mechanism is done over the internet. The data that is sent from Amazon.com to JP Chase Bank, it is most likely in the XML format, because XML is a data transfer type of a protocol or data transfer type of format. Okay, it is a content-oriented format. So Amazon will bundle your data into XML format and send to the JP Morgan Chase. JP Morgan Chase, once it validates your credit card, it will send a response back. So this is a request, and this is a response. Both happens in typically XML type of format. Okay. Now, this for what the format looks like, we don't know. I mean, that's whatever depends on how they have designed their credit card web service. So and what input it takes, it depends on that. But generally, when we are talking about that, so it could be something like that, right? So you have a root element called credit card. It's a single card, right? So I'm just writing it here, credit card. Okay. Then what it will have? Number, starting, closing tag number, and whatever the number is, 1, 2, 3, 4. It will have expiry date, tag, starting, ending, and your expiry date 11/15 or whatever. So whole data element, it bundles up into XML from Amazon, comes here. This guy reads it, credit card component, and generates a response in XML again. Okay, and this could be simply said. This response could be simply as simple as valid or invalid, something like that. Okay. The whole process, right? I mean, it is happening over the internet, and it's an application programming interface. It is kind of a web service are part of the application programming interface. And this is the API. You can call this as an API, the credit card processing. Any question here? The process was. You guys understand what is happening here? When we talk about the web services and APIs here.
Sure, I'm clear with the process, but I'm not able to link with this. What is mean by what is API is doing here?
So API is kind of like so JP Morgan Chase has built some type of software logic, which is accessible over internet here in this case, but it couldn't be exposed on their intranet sites as well, because there might be other software they have internally. They are using the APIs as well. It could be exposed or TCP/IP or anything else. Okay, so API is nothing but it's a software component. It's some type of piece of software. It has certain operations, inputs and outputs. So what are our inputs and outputs here? So credit card will take some type of input. As I mentioned, this type of input, they can take it. Here in this case, it's XML. It has some type of output. So output could be the response as simple as another response, XML, which includes yes, credit card is valid or invalid, type of thing. And the operation is nothing but a function or the logic that exposed. So how does the Amazon know what to call and from the credit card or how do I communicate back to the credit card component? What is the operation that I need to call in my software so that I can pass the input of XML and what type of output I get back from there. So each component will include operation, some type of operation, input and output. Do you guys understand the function in the programming logic? What is the function? I think Dilip went over some programming concept earlier, right? Let me see if I can put it a little bit differently here. So Dilip went over this, what was that? Create procedure, SQL. I'm using the SQL example here. And it will have some type of, let's say, in this case, let's assume that this is what the credit card processing logic is built on. Okay, so create procedure, and then it will have some type of name, and let's say is valid credit card. Okay, so this is a function. Now it needs to know that XML, the data that's coming in, right? So it could have an input called XML input, and it could have a type of string, and it could have 500 characters long. So it takes a whole XML as a string, and it could have an output, and then finally output could be written XML output. Okay, so it does some processing, reads the XML values, goes and queries in the database, whatever it needs to do, and finally returns some XML output. So this is one function that is being exposed in the credit card processing logic. Okay, again, this is the beginning, right? This is a create procedure. That's the beginning of the function. This is ending of the function. I think you guys went through that today earlier, so I just want to make sure you guys have that information. What I'm referring to is here. Kind of like a program structure, right? So this is a kind of like a typically the procedure or function will look like here. This is in T-SQL, but in the Java, it will be a different programming language. So it has its own syntax, but it has some type of entry point. Here it's this is a main function, and it does some processing here. Now, as a QA, you don't worry about the details of what is really in the function. What you need to worry about is, how do I test this piece of logic or this piece of function that is built by the credit card processing, and does it work with the Amazon system? That's all you care. What's internal? It's a black box to you. You don't know how they have built it. But all you need to know is, what is the input? What's supposed to be the expected output? And when I send in some test data, can I do that? Does it return you the right result? That's all it matters, basically. Okay, so that's the whole point of the APIs and services. Does that help, Deepak?
Yes.
Okay. So API is more like a generic term. And when we talk about the web services, it's specific to the communication over web or the internet. That's all it is. That's the main difference between web service and APIs.
So like we're designing a RFlow system. So because in this case, does API has any role or?
In the RFlow, let's say the loan calculator function, right? So right now, let me flip to another diagram here. See if I can show you what we could have for the RFlow. Okay, so for RFlow, right? Here in this example, so you guys are testing the loan calculator functionality. How are you testing it right now? You go to the web page, right? That's where you are testing right now, and you input some amount, loan amount maybe 1,000. You click on calculate, and it gets you $30 back, right? That's all you are doing right now. Okay, so that's within the one application. That's within the web app that you have. But assume tomorrow somebody else wants to use the same logic that you have built for loan calculation. Doesn't matter, it's right or wrong. let's say somebody in India or some other company wants to use the same logic that you have built. The main goal here is they don't have to reinvent the wheel. The second company, because they don't want to know all the internals. They just want to get the, okay, what's the payment amount should be, no matter what the interest rate is and all those things, right? So that, let's say this company wants to use it, right? Same way, there is another company with another software, they want to use your software. So how do you go about it, right? Because right now it's within the web app and it's not exposed anywhere. Only your web application can call it, or Rflown can call it, that particular piece of logic. So what the Rflown can do in order to make it accessible over the internet is they can create a loan calculator API or web service here, which can be accessed over internet by anybody in the world. Okay, so there are special ways of writing the web service. Okay, so they have to create a web service. It's a piece of logic or code they have to write separately to expose that logic over the internet. Okay. Now, once they do that, once they create a this particular loan web service, then anybody in the world, like software 1, software 2, software 3, they can call the software, they can send XML request, and they will get XML response back. And what this request will look like? They will send the loan amount of $1,000, and they are expecting the response back as a $30 every time. So it's a now software to software communication. Okay, they are not calling your web application because they can't. Web application is for data entry type of things. Okay, so in order to use the logic that Rflown has put together, they have to call a web service, and they can integrate within their app, which can be any application like .NET, C#, doesn't matter. Okay. Does it make sense, Dimple?
Yes.
Okay. Any question on this one here? Okay. As I said, just remember, you will have XML input, XML output, and you need to know what the web service is supposed to do, what type of calculation it could have, like Rflown, just like Rflown loan calculator, right? You need to know the calculation that is doing, and so you just validate against that calculation, following the same process. You have your step, you have expected result, and you're gonna have actual result. Same process. There is no different here when you are talking about testing the web services or doing the API testing. Okay. So as I already mentioned, right, specifically, so web service is kind of like one type of API. So API is a generic term, but web service is specifically for communicating over the internet, doing the data exchange over the internet via some piece of software. So by definition, two applications machine will exchange the data irrespective of their underlying architecture and the technology. Okay, so in the example that I showed you here, so here one application is written in .NET, other one is Java, but doesn't really matter because they communicate via XML. XML is interpreted by all different parties here, so it will work just fine. Okay. Now, services can be implemented in different ways. Okay, there are several ways of implementing it. There are two main ways. One is a SOAP protocol, and second one is a REST protocol. Okay. Again, we're not going to go into technicals of what these protocols are, but again, SOAP is based on XML only. So the data we talked about, right? Exchanging, it works with the XML. So SOAP is strictly based on XML. So you have to exchange data in XML format. That's what the SOAP is about. REST is a different types of protocol. So it works with XML, and there is another format called JSON, JSON. Okay. JSON format is very similar to the XML. The only difference that it doesn't have tagging like slashes. It's just a name and value pair, basically. And I'll show you one example of JSON, what it will look like. But mainly XML and JSON are the two primary format that REST can support. SOAP will support only XML. Has to be XML. Okay. Now every service will expose some type of a WSDL document. So WSDL, right? It's a web service description language. So think about if the credit card, in our example of credit card processing, right? What operation they're exposing? What is the input for that? What is the output? What the output supposed to be for that service? It is described in the web service description language document. Okay, so every service will have some type of WSDL document, and I'll show you one example, so it makes a little bit more clear. Okay, which is based on the XML, and it will be used to describe the services offered by web service. Think about it. If you go to the Great Clips, how do you know what services they are offering? So you look at the menu board, right, and say, okay, this haircut is $5, or for child is $10, or $2, $3, whatever it is. And those services, same thing. This WSDL document describes the services. That's all it does. There is nothing else for that. Now, sometimes as a QA, it's little bit lengthy XML document. You don't need to understand what is there. That's why we use tools. Tools can help you interpret this type of documents and help you test those things. Okay, but I'll show you examples so that you understand what is WSDL. Not that you need to know any details about it. Okay. Any question on here? Okay. Let's talk about testing. What are we testing and how are we going to test, right? So understand the WSDL file. Again, as I said, this is why we use tools, so that you don't need to understand every detail, but you start with the WSDL document. Okay. Determine the operations that particular web service provides. So as I said, you need to understand what the operations are there and figure out what's the input supposed to be and what's the output supposed to be. So that's important. Determine the XML request. So this is the input request that you are sending a request to the service, which we need to send along with the values, test data, and so forth. Understand what is the output coming out and see if it's correct. That's what you are validating. Okay. And finally, use a tool or write a code to send a request and validate the response. Now, writing a code, developer does that, not you guys. Okay, that's a developer will write a code. If you're writing the automation or unit test and so forth, they will create a code to work with that. So it's pretty straightforward. Let's see the actual service and example, and we start with the WSDL. Okay. Not talking about tools yet. So let me flip to the another piece here. So let me pick one service. We'll start with a simple service and see if you guys are able to understand that. Okay. So right now, as I said, it is accessible over internet, right? That's why it's called web service. A piece of code that is accessible over internet. Okay. So here in this example, I have a calculator web service, which is written by somebody. Okay. And this is the URL to access that web service here. Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go to their site here, and this is all it shows you. There is not much information here. Okay, because web service is application to application communication, there is not much to see. But as I said, every service will have some type of visual document. So this is the URL to access visual document. So I'm going to click on that. And as I said, it will be ugly XML document. Okay. Now, there are certain things here which I would like you guys to see. So there will be operations. For us, what operation this web service exposes. Okay, those are the important part. So I see it under operation name, subtract, multiply, add, and divide. Those four are operations that this web service can expose. So it has four methods it exposes. Okay, and those are the ones that you will have to test because it exposes this operation. Now, what inputs and output it takes, right? Second part is what is the input for each operation and what is the output for each operation, because that's what important for you guys, right? So if I'm just looking at the service here, then I need to figure out what is really the input here, what is really the output. Now, if you are familiar with the visual, yes, you can go and figure it out. What are the inputs and outputs? Because it's somewhere here. Okay, but we are not worried about that. Let me jump to the tool. Now we can see what are the inputs and outputs and how it works. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy the visual URL. By the way, when you are testing the SOAP-based service, visual document, whatever the URL you have, you put a question mark and type WSDL, and you will get the visual document for any service, SOAP-based service. Okay. All right. So I got the URL, and now I'm going to fire up my SOAP UI tool. Because I like the tool. I mean, I don't want to interpret this XML by hand or just looking at it. Okay, so the tool will start up something like this. Okay. And let me close out this. So on the left side of the tool, there is a project. I don't know whether you guys can see it, but it's a projects. That's what it says. And then there are some file menu and tools, desktop, and help. This is very basic stuff. Okay. So here, right there. But what I need to do is I need to create a new SOAP-based project because I'm testing a SOAP-based web service here. So what I'll do is I'll click on new SOAP project, and it will ask me first, what is my visual? Where is this service located, and what is the visual document URL? Okay. So that's what I need to provide here, visual document URL. So let me go ahead and do that. So I'll paste the URL that I have, and I'll put it there. It will automatically give some project name there. You can just ignore. You can override it, but you don't have to worry about it. It will automatically assign some project name. And I'm just going to click OK at this point. So it read the visual document, it interpreted those operations here on the left side, which are, I know it's very difficult to see right now on the screen, but it says add operation, divide, multiply, and subtract. Okay, those four are the operations here. So, and there is a request for each operation, you will see that. So if I expand all four, you have request, 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 request. So this is a test request. It automatically creates a test template for you to send in your request and basically get the response back. Okay. So let me see what the request will look like, because that's what you are interested in from QA perspective. How do I test it? So that's where you go open up the request and see what it is. Let me expand this further. Okay, hopefully you guys can see this, but again, it's an XML document, right? And it's a SOAP-based request. So SOAP-based request has a couple of things in there. Okay. Here. Okay, so this is your XML, right? SOAP request or SOAP envelope, I think. It's more like an envelope, okay? And you have ending tab SOAP. Okay. Now, this is a root element. And just like HTML, you have a header and body. So here, you have a SOAP and header element. You have an ending SOAP. Okay, and then you have a SOAP body and the SOAP body ending element. Okay, so you will have header and body just like HTML, same way it is structured. Now, so if I flip back here, so you guys can see it, SOAP envelope header. I have it header. Header is empty header. So empty header meaning I can write it this way, or I can just put a slash here and it will be empty SOAP header. But body, this is a body element, SOAP body, and that's where I have my two input elements. How do I know there are two input elements? It is with the question mark. So what the tool does, it interprets those operations and say what are the inputs. So it reads big XML document and formats out the inputs with the question mark for you here. So this is where I can populate my test data and send a request, generate a request for the service so that it interprets and it sends me back the result of that. Now, what is it you need to know here? How do you know what to send in, right? And what comes back? So this is more of a calculator type of service, right? It has the addition operation. So you already know the logic, what's in the service. So how would you test this calculator type of logic? Anybody? If I give you guys calculator, how would you test it? Addition operation. Two numbers, right? That's what actually this service does. If you supply two numbers, you will get the result back. What is the addition of that number? Okay. So you need to know the internal logic of the service because that's what you are testing. Okay, when we say test the service here, that's what you are testing, the internal logic of the web service. A good thing you already know what's the logic for addition, subtraction, multiplication, and so forth. So you can come up with some test data here on your own. So if I put 10 instead of question mark, I'm going to write my own test data. Because question marks is you have to override it when it tool generates a request for you. Okay, and here if I do 20, I'm supposed to get 30 back in my expected result when I execute this step. Okay, so my request is ready. It has not given me result yet. So how do I send the request to the actual service? So that service can interpret my request and sends me the response back. So there is a little bit green arrow here. Okay, so that's what it does. If I send it, it will go call the service wherever it is located in the world, and then it will return me back the SOAP envelope again with the header and body. And this time it gave me the value of 30 back here. So this is what I'm going to validate against my expected outcome because this is the actual, right? This is the actual value coming out. Now, if it sends me 25, that means something is wrong in the service logic. Because it's addition logic, it's supposed to be 1 + 1 = 2. It can't be 5. Right? So this is the response, comes back in this format, and then again XML, and then you are reading this value and then validating, okay, is service returning the right result or not. Okay. Any question here on what's happening when we are doing this? What are we doing here? Any question on that? Okay, so let me do one thing. How about we'll do the divide one. So I'm testing the divide logic here. Okay, so now it generated a request for me, something like that. It's a 2-number division, right? What are A and B? So how would you test this division part? Okay, so that's so let's talk about that. There's 2 numbers. So let me go back here. All right, so you have 2 numbers division, right? So we are saying division. What are different scenarios here? Okay, so first thing, good 2 numbers. This is more like a happy path scenario. 2 numbers, supply good 2 numbers, right? This is happy path. Okay, we all know happy path will work. But what are the other things that you can test? Okay, so second one, you can do supply decimal numbers. Okay, what else? When you are talking about division. Non-numeric, okay, supply non-numeric. Alphabet, right? Okay, see how your service does. This is a different scenario. What else?
Divide by 0.
Okay, so divide by 0. And see what your service does. Right? Anything else left here?
Divide by infinity.
You don't really have a way to put infinity, right? Here.
Okay.
Because these are numbers. It says only integer numbers. Int A and int B. Only integer numbers. So do you think this decimal scenario will execute? We don't know, right? So we have to try it out to see what it does. Now you can obviously do supply alphabets. It could be negative number, right? That includes alphabets and so forth, and work with that. Again, your thought process remains same here, whether you are testing the web service or the web app. You know the logic, what the logics you are testing, what is the calculation, A divided by B, right? That's what you are testing. And you are coming up with different scenarios and different test data. That part doesn't change with the web service. Okay. So whatever you are doing with the web app, again, exactly you have to break down into multiple scenarios and then write your steps just using a different tool. That's all it is. You are using SOAP UI tool. It's an additional tool to help you test out. Okay. So if I go here, let's say in this scenario, if I do 10 divided by 0, what am I expecting? If I do that, what am I expecting? Error. Okay. So let's see what the service does. So service returns you some fault code. So the way error is written is generally in the fault message. This is called a fault message for the SOAP-based services. Okay. So if I go back here, so if there are any errors here, loan calculator part, right? If I send in alphabet, this service, the response will include fault message. Again, it's another XML. So there are 2 possible scenarios for the web services. If it's good, it will send you valid XML and you can read the results and see what's happening. Otherwise, you will get a fault message, which is another XML message in the body. And you can read it, what's wrong with your service or whatever, and it's the expected result or not. So here, it seems like it is expected. divided by 0 is not allowed or whatever it says. Okay, so this scenario could pass because it gives you the fault message appropriate. Now, if you do -10, what could happen here? What's the expected outcome, first of all? Right? Now, again, see what happens. So it did send you the right response, -1, right? And so forth. So integers, they did allow it. Now, if we do A, B, C, see what happens, right? So if I do divided by ABC, again, it gives you some divided by 0. Is that a valid response? I don't know. It should have told you it's alphabets are not supplied and so forth. You might want to fill your scenario here. Because it's definitely not divided by 0, right? So that's the same process. You have to go through, open a defect, and talk to the developer, say, I'm expecting or requirement says a different type of error message, not divided by 0. Okay. All right. So let's come back here. So here, right? Understand the wisdom, just as a general understanding, that's all, right? You don't need to worry about details. Determine the operation. This is the important part, right? What are you testing? What operations you are testing? Do you know the internal logic of the operation? If so, figure out the input and output. Okay, input meaning what the operation takes and what's supposed to be the expected output. And finally, use the tool to test the service. Any question here? It's a little bit different than testing the web app, okay? Because you are using different tool, but it's a process itself. There is not much difference process-wise. Okay, so let's come back here. So there is a multiplication and there is a subtraction operation as well. Now, when you get a chance, you play around with those, which you guys will do that next. So let's do one thing. I think you guys need the software first on your machine, right? Have you guys installed this software on your machine, or you just download it? So I think everybody just downloaded, right? So what I want you guys to do is go ahead and install it. It's again very straightforward process. Wherever you saved it on your machine, just double click it and just click next, accept license, and move on. It doesn't take more than like 3 minutes to install.
But I think the other one I couldn't get it.
The SOAP UI one, actually, you can install on Mac, but you have to download it.
Yeah, it's not available on the Mac.
But the SOAP UI, you should be able to use it on Mac.
I have downloaded.
You download it, right? Okay, good. So once you download, right, double click the SOAP UI.
Can I get from the app or just did you follow Harsh's directions or downloaded it from the?
I sent you URL to download.
Yeah.
Go to in the email. You go to my email, yesterday's email.
Yeah, 2 o'clock. Yeah.
Online folks, make sure you install it as well.